Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, in November of this election year, a new leader emerged with the strong support of the American people. We, too, congratulate the Chicago Cubs. Elsewhere, it was politics as usual, in which many of the American people wish they had other choices. We'll look at Tuesday's election, including the stormy Senate debate, profiles of the major candidates, and the latest polls. We'll also hear about an investigation of the widespread impact and use of heroin. And we'll look at the latest in the Mike Yenni saga. On the field for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Jeremy Alford, publisher, LaPolitics.com. Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. And Stephanie Grace, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate. We're going to go over to Errol first, just for an update, the latest on what's going on with Jefferson Parish President Mike Yenni and the recall petition on him, etc.
Yeah, there were some developments today. The Jefferson Chamber issued a statement. The board of directors had a meeting, and they voted to recommend to Mr. Yenni that he resign. And this is a big thing, especially when you're a suburban county government and when the chamber turns against you, because I mean that's really just part of the makeup of that kind of area. And so having the chamber take a statement, and in their statement, the president said this distraction resulting from the situation has made the parish's current climate unfavorable for existing and prospective business as well as its residents. And that was Todd Murphy as the president. And then this morning, the Times-Picayune did an editorial saying essentially the same thing, saying that Mr. Yenni is not in a position to govern and urging that he resign so that let somebody else take over. There are a lot of things that, a lot of this has been going on. A lot of city governments within Jefferson Parish have urged President Yenni to resign. But I think what really pushed it this week was the Jefferson Parish School Board. You actually have a situation where you have a chief executive of a jurisdiction who's not allowed to go on school grounds. And the Picayune editorial pointed that out. He says, here you have a parish president who can't even go to school fairs, who can't get involved. And this whole situation is just bizarre in so many ways. And that, usually anytime there's a public issue, there's at least two sides. Maybe one side is stronger than the other. But there's not two sides on this. I think the public is pretty much 100% agreement that they don't like the idea of someone sexting with a 17-year-old. And so there's no one else taking up the other side. But the other part of it is that to this point, there's been no legal action. There's been no indictment, no trial. I mean, nobody's saying that what's happened is illegal.
However, there was an admission at the beginning by Mike Yenni that it did happen.
Yeah.
And that is, that got the immediate reaction of all of the political forces against him.
And that was what turned it at that point, because prior to that, everybody was pretty cautious about being able to say something about it because they didn't have all the evidence. But once he said, yes, I did something wrong, it's something that's technically, maybe it's not illegal, but that really solidified the opinions. But I've never seen a case that's quite like this. And so meanwhile, the recall effort goes on. The organizer, a man by the name of Bob Evans, whose father was once a very prominent Jefferson Parish councilman, is claiming around 30,000 signatures out of about 90,000 that they're going to need. And as we're speaking, there's a legal battle going on as to how far away, because part of their strategy is on Election Day Tuesday to have people out there trying to get that petition signed. And there's some question about how far away you have to be. Can it be 600 feet? The petition drivers, organizers, are arguing in favor of 100 feet, which of course you can reach
from a polling station.
Yeah, from the polling places. So meanwhile, that goes on also. So the battle rages, and just about everybody of prominence in the position to making a statement urging Yenni to resign has done it now. I think there's one other business group that hasn't yet, and people are wishing they would, but it's certainly lining up against him.
Well, you use the word bizarre, which is exactly right. It's unprecedented, really, and we've gone past the point of passing judgment on the texting, or sexting, if you want to call it that, to the point of, at this point, all of the parish officials, all of the parish-wide elected officials, the council, the school board, and even the archdiocese banning him from Catholic schools, you would think that it leaves him in a position where he is
It's
ineffective.
untenable.
How can he govern under those
But
circumstances?
speaking to his side, like the other side, as you pointed out, is held by Mike Yenni, which he says, I can do this.
And he's
my
actually,
family supports me.
He did an interview with VUE this week. He's going on the offensive, saying this is overblown, and it's
very well, and who knows, once again, rather than look at whether the allegations themselves
Right.
may or may not pan out into a criminal charge. But at this point, he can't step foot on, playgrounds and schools and do ribbon cuttings
whenever
and
he goes
all
to
of
the
things
chamber,
you
the
expect
council
of a
chamber,
parish president.
he's the issue.
But also this week, the Yenni family has come out strongly against him too. And if you know his situation, he had his name changed to his mother's last name, which is Yenni. His grandfather and his uncle were both very popular political figures, and so his name was changed. But that's caused a little bit of hard feelings within the Yenni family
within
too.
the family.
I think the only really Jefferson Parish politician of real prominence who hasn't taken a stand on this is the district attorney. And it's proper for the district attorney not to take a stand on this,
right,
because it would have been just because of the nature of his job.
Okay, so the issue of the recall stations as close as they can be to a polling station remains in court. We don't know for sure right now how close they'll be. Okay, let's move on now and talk about elections. The Senate election, the U.S. Senate election for the state of Louisiana. There was a debate. I'm not sure how much people learned from that debate this week. It was sort of a fiery one.
It was interesting. It was Raycom Media, which owns a group of television stations around the state, including WVUE locally. John Snell, who is probably the most seasoned, still active moderator, been doing this for years, is very good at it, was the moderator. And it was a mess. And I have to say, WVUE didn't even get to run it because the 7th game of the World Series was the night, so we picked it up here on LTV. So maybe
WYES.
WYES, I'm sorry. And I think a lot of people preferred baseball. So the story was David Duke. Raycom did a poll. Even though David Duke has been polling, in low single digits throughout the campaign, they did their own poll to determine who was going to be included. And the top 5 who've been in every debate, they each scored above 10%. They were invited, and then the cutoff was 5%. David Duke got 5.1%, so he just eked his way in there. And it had already been decided that this debate was going to be held at historically black Dillard University. So all of a sudden you have the prospect of a former Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard coming to a historically black university, and things were very tense. Of course they were. And nobody was allowed. It was in a big auditorium. Nobody was allowed into the auditorium, including the media. There were protests outside. There was some police action, some arrests. Nobody has been charged, but it really took the spotlight away from the debate. And then once the debate started, it was all David Duke, and Snell had a really hard time managing him. They got into a shouting argument that kind of busted the format early on. And of course, the other candidates were attacking him, and he was just lashing out at everybody, and it ended up just being not productive. We kind of swung wildly from anti-Semitism and why David Duke talks about CNN Jews to healthcare and Social Security, and then back, and it was really hard to get any conversation going among the other candidates and on the real issues.
So generally from the debate, would you say that, and then you said it was hard to get the conversation going, was there anything made a little bit more clear in terms of candidate positions? I mean, did we learn anything from the candidates, would you say, or was it really just
the other
this focus
candidates
on Duke?
I think this campaign has been really stagnant. That's the way I would put it, that we've had the 2 lead Democrats and the 3 lead Republicans, these 2 groups fighting among themselves to get those voters. So you had, we really have had the Democrats take Democratic positions, Republicans take Republicans positions pretty consistently. More of that. One thing that happened at the end, though, was Caroline Fayard, one of the Democrats, has been really going after Foster Campbell, the other, because he has not said out loud until now, or had not, that he's supporting Hillary Clinton. He would say he's supporting the Democratic nominee. And at the end, John Snell went around and asked everybody, and he finally said, I'm supporting the Democratic nominee, Hillary Clinton. So he's now on tape.
Okay.
I will say that the David Duke show did not end when the camera stopped rolling. That as we were sitting in the media room, because they had us in an adjacent room, that David Duke kind of just bust in. They let all the candidates in at the same time. It was a bit of a kind of a scrum, and David Duke came in and in a very loud voice, just short of shouting, held his own press conference while everybody else was meeting. And he had an elderly gentleman with him that he introduced who served in the war. And there was one reporter who was on deadline about 4 feet away from David Duke, had his earphones in, and he ripped his earphones out. He said, "Can you please do this in the hallway?" But David Duke just kept going, and I mean, it was a sideshow, and I don't think anyone was served by that.
And isn't
debate.
that what he's all about?
It is.
He doesn't have a chance to make the runoff.
No.
But the chance to get, I would guess you could call it mainstream attention, he is going to eat that up, and he did.
And he did, and I was following along on Twitter, and all of a sudden when the anti-Semitism portion of the debate happened, all of a sudden there were some of the national reporters chiming in, saying, "Can you believe this is what we're seeing on a debate stage in 2016? Not a good look for Louisiana."
Well, you said something, about people not being really served by this. I mean, this was a chance for the voters to get to know the candidates a little better.
Yeah.
It didn't serve us well to have that kind of spectacle, really, out of a debate.
No,
but let's talk about polls real quick. Coming out of that debate, what are we seeing?
So we published, in general, 4 polls that were given to La Politics this morning for paying subscribers. And, I mean, look, for the fourth week in a row, we're seeing some shifts in the polling trends. I have 3 polls that all show Carolyn Fayard surging, largely on the back of these attacks where she tries to link Foster Counsel David Duke, which have been described as everything from inaccurate to unfair. And you got John Fleming, who is just spending like a drunken sailor on TV right now. He has moved up too. I had another poll, a 4th poll, that shows John Fleming and Foster Campbell statistically tied for 2nd. The 2 takeaways, the 2 conclusions from all 4 of these polls is, 1, John Kennedy's going to make the runoff, and number 2 is that Charles Boustany has a very tough road ahead of him, despite having a very powerful base in Acadiana.
Right. And newspaper endorsements. He just got Newell Norman's endorsement the other day.
But the overall takeaway from this is that the black vote is going to decide the runoff in the U.S. Senate race. And I think that's why you saw both Carolyn Fayard and Foster Campbell trying to leverage their stage time alongside David Duke during that debate.
And they were on either side because they were lined up in alphabetical order, so it was an interesting visual.
Yeah,
a lot of people are curious as to why Boustany's candidacy has not taken off.
Well, it did. When you run from a base with like Acadiana, and if you can consolidate that area from the Texas line to right outside of Baton Rouge, you can win a big race with that. That's enough. Scott Angel almost made the runoff in the governor's race with nothing more but that. Boustany, what's going on is that he has taken a lot of hits over the past week and a half from the ESA fund, which is the pro-Kennedy super PAC. They have laser focused. They have focused on him. He's taken a lot of hits, and at the same time, his campaign and the Boustany super PAC, the pro-Boustany super PAC, are attacking Kennedy. There are no positives on TV for the past 8 days with Boustany in them. So it's a gamble. He can knock these votes off of Kennedy. They're falling off of Kennedy, but there's no guarantee they go to Boustany. And if you look at the recent polls, it shows that John Fleming has just as much of a chance to pick up those votes as does Boustany. And it's put him in a very awkward position here towards the end of the race.
Hasn't Kennedy traditionally overpulled, if for no other reason than his name, which is still a well-known political name?
And going back to this theme that African-American voters will decide who makes this runoff, there's a couple of different things going on. One is that between Boustany and Kennedy, they're holding 10% of the black vote. Conventional wisdom holds that come Tuesday, that vote's going to fall off. The question is, who does it go to? Secondly, who's going to have the better ground game? Foster Campbell is supposed to be on all these community ballots around the state, which are very important. But that's something that's hard to confirm. You can't exactly call these groups up and get someone on the record saying, well, yeah, they paid in, they bought their way onto this ballot, they're going to appear on the ballot. There's a lot of moving pieces, and right now, even with all those trends, I think we need to go ahead and say that everyone below John Kennedy in the polling that I've seen, they're all bunched up together again. They're all either, in ranking order, they're all either within the margin of error or slightly outside.
Okay. So let's talk about the candidates then.
Yes.
Stephanie, you were going to sort of give us some background, or both of you guys, if you can. Let's take a look at the list of the candidates that we have to bring up right now, and these are just listed in alphabetical order, and these are the top candidates who poll the highest, and these are the ones that really we have been talking primarily about. Charles Boustany Jr.
again, he's a congressman from Lafayette. He's a retired heart surgeon. Has been in Congress since actually right before Katrina, which would make him, I think, the most senior person left, except David Vitter,
Right.
who switched houses. He's interesting. He's someone who he's a Republican, but he kind of has some Democratic relatives, including the Reggie family that married into the Kennedy family. But he is someone who was an ally of John Boehner. He's someone who is more of a mainstream Republican compared to someone like Fleming.
Yeah, he's the establishment candidate. He has
Yeah.
a seat on Ways and Means. This is a guy who can play ball in D.C.
He's very focused on tax policy. He's very focused on trade policy. And he's kind of wonky. If you hear him, I wrote that in this last debate, he was almost in his own debate because he was really just talking about policy and everybody else was talking about Duke and kind of shooting at each other.
Yeah.
And he, again, as I said, he's gotten some big endorsements. We'll see. Another thing about Acadiana is there are other big races in Acadiana which may help turn out, one for Congress, one for Supreme Court.
Okay, David Duke.
David Duke, what do you say?
Never heard of him.
No. Here he is again. Maybe this will be the last time. He, again, is trying to run on Donald Trump's coattails. He has said Trump's ascent shows that his time has come, is the way he's put it. He's gone really hardcore anti-Semitic racist. If you follow his Twitter feed, it's really shocking, I will tell you. John Snell did ask him about some of that rhetoric. And I don't think, other than this poll, there's any sign that he's going anywhere.
Okay, John Fleming Jr.
He is the congressman from northwest Louisiana. He is a physician, but he's also a businessman. He's made his money on Subway franchises and these FedEx stores. So if you need to ship a Subway sandwich, he's probably your guy. He has raised a significant amount of money, a lot of it coming from his own pockets, and he's playing on TV pretty heavily. He's to the right of the field. If it weren't for David Duke and Rob Maness in this race, he would probably be polling a lot stronger.
Okay.
He's a real Tea Party figure.
John Kennedy.
State treasurer, longtime state treasurer, was a Democrat, as we keep hearing. He actually has run for Senate twice before, once as a Democrat against David Vitter, once as a Republican against Mary Landrieu, lost both times. Very smart guy running this kind of down-home campaign. He kind of exaggerates his accent. He throws in a lot of, phrases like, I'd rather drink weed killer than do anything, vote for Obamacare, you name it. He's running as an outsider. He's basically saying, these Democrats and Republicans in Washington, they're all the same. They all need to go. I'm the guy who, is not afraid to stand up to anybody. That's his campaign.
Foster Campbell.
This guy has been in Louisiana politics longer than anyone up on the screen. Yeah. He's been endorsed by Governor John Bel Edwards, which he has tried to make a let out hay about. He sits on the Public Service Commission, which looks at the utility rates and other regulatory actions. And he is one of the two main Democrats in this race. Bit of a populist streak, and he's fighting with Carolyn Fayard for the heart of the Democratic Party.
And Carolyn Fayard.
And she's a lawyer from New Orleans, actually originally from Denham Springs, comes from a family of very well-off trial lawyers who are largely funding her campaign. She also has the support of the Landrieux, Mary and Mitch. And she's running really as kind of a next generation, I'm not part of the good old boy system, I'm the only woman. Her family does have close ties to the Clintons, so they're talking about that. And again, it's a real battle for this Democratic vote. If one Democrat were on the ballot, that person would really have a guaranteed spot. But with two, if they split it, who knows? We could get two Republicans or...
And she's supported by pro-charter groups, whereas Foster Campbell is supported by the traditional teachers' unions and union groups.
That's probably the one issue that really divides them.
It's kind of interesting in the case of Fayard. She does not come with political experience in the form of holding an office, and yet it seems as if she does simply by running and running well in the past.
She ran for lieutenant governor against late Jay Darden and did well enough to establish herself as someone who people look to as a future candidate.
And the two congressmen who are candidates for Senate, they have had to give up their congressional
Correct.
seats to seek the Senate seat.
Right, so there are 2 open seats in the 3rd district and the 4th district. So we could, if neither of those make it to the runoff and win, we could be losing 3 members of Congress this year.
Just a quick word about the other 19 candidates in the race.
Yes.
That you really feel for them, because I know
You
it's
do.
hard, that I know they really hope that they can get the attention and feel they deserve more attention, but you can't cover 24 people equally, and so a decision has to be made somewhere along the line, as the TV debates did, and what they did was they did polling data. And you feel for them, because there's probably somebody that really has something brilliant to say, but they can blame their 18 other people who are running against them. If the field had 7 people, then they could get more attention, but
Right.
that's just
Or
hapless.
they can do what a lot of other politicians do, which is start at a lower office and try to work their way up.
You know, the key to it with a 24-person field, and we saw this year, is you got to have the cash. You know, we saw that with Abay Patel. This is a New Orleans businessman. He's Indian American, first generation.
Good story.
And you know, I think he came out the gate. He raised a few $100,000, and all of a sudden you see him in advocate stories, and you see him showing up at forums. And so if you can get out there and you can raise some money and post some numbers in your FEC report, that's one way to climb to the top of the heap.
Okay, thanks a lot. And Election Day? Finally, this Tuesday. Okay, over to Mike right now. And Mike has a series running on WWL about the heroin epidemic that we are experiencing here, but we're not really alone. I mean, it's sort of across the country, but it's really had a tremendous impact on our community.
Yes, we have been calling the series The New Face of Heroin. You're absolutely right. It is a national epidemic, but it is being felt very acutely, not just in New Orleans, but throughout the region and even the state. The numbers bear that out in terms of overdose deaths. Coroners both in Jefferson and Orleans reporting record number of deaths. But even beyond that, and I was able to get from EMS the numbers of Narcan revivals, which is the reversal agent used by first responders to revive somebody who's in the throes of an overdose. And those numbers are off the charts. Just to give you an example of how bad the problem is, in all of 2015, just in Orleans Parish, there were 63 overdose deaths for heroin and all other opiates. And that can be pills like oxycodone. One of the real killers is that a lot of heroin on the street is laced with agents like fentanyl, which is a much stronger derivative and very dangerous. So that's 63 in all of 2015. For the first 6 months of 2016, there were 81. So the first 6 months blew past the number of deaths last year. So Jefferson is coming in either right at or just below the New Orleans numbers. So people don't normally think of the suburban parishes as a hotbed for that kind of drug activity. Jefferson has had that for 3 years running, just hasn't gotten a lot of attention. If you look at the EMS Narcan revivals, right now in New Orleans alone, they're on pace for 430 people who very well could have died if they had not gotten that life or death, basically, last second emergency intervention.
So there's so many questions here. I mean, why is this happening? And we've seen just fairly recently in the news people found in their cars with needles still stuck in their arms.
Right.
One, unfortunately, it already expired. The other one was saved. What's going on here?
Well, there are a lot of factors, and I will say that some of those stories I covered, as breaking news when the son of the St. Bernard Sheriff Jimmy Pullman, Justin Pullman, tragically died in his car, needle in his hand, in the 9th Ward. It was just several days before that when the son of the Slidell CAO, Tim Matheson, his son, was found in the car, needle in his hand, passed out after crashing into a utility pole and several cars. So that showed just sort of the tip of the iceberg. When we went back to look at the big picture, which we did in this 4-part series, we see that there are so many factors contributing. It's almost like a perfect storm. Number one, there was a generation of widespread prescription of opioid pain medications, OxyContin, hydrocodone, and only recently has both DEA and using data from Center for Disease Control's decided that's a really bad idea. And the medical community is now cutting back severely on the prescription of those. However, they're highly addictive. So you have spawned a generation of people addicted to that pain medication just to get through a day and feel normal.
And this crosses demographic lines.
All demographic lines. And that's why, we call it the new face of heroin, because anyone who's been in an accident, goes to the doctor, can get prescribed this medication. Well, now, harder and harder to get and maintain that, you find people going to the street. And heroin has never been cheaper or more available than it is right now. I talked to many addicts who basically came from an injury, they were on the pills, that got cut off, and they can, for a $20 hit, get themselves through the day.
Now, in your series, there are personal stories, just heartbreaking stories, mothers trying to help their children. And I know for a family member, a friend, or whomever, if you know that you have know someone in your life who has a problem with heroin, that you can go get that Narcan, right? Without a prescription, can you go?
Well,
you can go to your
in
university
very
medical
limited,
center
very limited number of pharmacies. That was some fairly progressive measure that the legislature adopted. There's actually a big push by the medical community for the legislature to do a lot more to make this antidote as readily available as defibrillators.
Okay, before we have to move on, I want you to plug that tonight is your last.
Yes, tonight we actually got kind of the most difficult side to capture, at least on camera for TV, which is a dealer who really lays out a very unique, rarely heard perspective, and I think people will have their eyes opened by this interview.
Excellent series on a really heartbreaking and frightening problem. Thanks, Mike. 10 o'clock tonight, right?
Correct.
Okay. Time to look ahead. Errol.
Well, the city of Kenner is just getting around tomorrow to electing a mayor to replace Mike Yenni, who was elected parish president about a year ago. It's not Kenner's fault; it's the election law's fault. And so the primary is tomorrow. There are five candidates, and so there'll probably be a runoff, and the runoff will be December 10th. And whoever wins will serve out the rest of Yenni's term, which will go into 2018.
Primary Tuesday, you say?
Tuesday.
Okay. Jeremy, quick.
We're taking pre-orders for Long Shot, the book I wrote on the 2015 governor's race with Tyler Bridges. You can order the book at louisianalongshot.com. It's Christmas. Get more than one.
Perfect Christmas gift.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, just to plug future stories on this heroin epidemic, we've been flooded with calls and emails that are really pointing to what are the solutions, and we're going to be addressing that in future stories.
Okay, that's needed.
Once we get past Tuesday, Election Day, then Congress comes back for the lame duck session. One of the big issues will be the rest of the flood money that Louisiana is hoping to get. One thing that's happened since is we had Hurricane Matthew, which affected a bunch of new states. I think there's some hope there might be some sympathy, or they might be able to package aid for different states and get support from those states.
So
We'll
please
see.
let us get past this
Yes.
election day.
Yes.
It's been a long election cycle.
The world won't end.
Thanks you guys for being here. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Go vote. Have a good evening.